Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Orbital in Conversation with. This is episode 2 of this series. I'm Maddie Sidgwick. I'm the editor in chief this year.
And I'm Eve Jarvis, and I'm the deputy editor in chief. And today we're joined by.
Hi, I'm Ibrahim Halawi, lecturer in international politics at Royal Holloway.
So just to kick things off, how exactly did you get to become like a member of Royal Holloway? What were the steps to sort of getting to where you are today?
Oh yeah, I mean, first, thanks for having me. I think episode 2, that's a pleasure. Interestingly, I started as a student. So I came to Royal Holloway as a master's student, and I did my master's in political theory. Um, but then when I was finishing my master's, I met my dissertation supervisor, who's not in the department anymore. Her name is Sandra Halperin. And she got really excited about my dissertation project. And she said, well, you have 4 days to submit a PhD proposal. So go figure it out. So I had to rush and set up my application. I submitted my PhD. And then I ended up staying at Royal Holloway for my PhD as well, under her supervision. And then when I finished my PhD, I got a fellowship. I was teaching in the department. So I stayed as a fellow for a few years. And then I'd like to think that I became indispensable. And so I got the lectureship position.
Yeah, no, that's great. Would you kind of like to go into what your research is on, what your like specific interests are, and kind of like why you chose that area of the field?
Sure, I think politics in general is extremely interesting because it's omnipresent. It penetrates every single aspect of our lives, and of course, until one studies it, one's not really aware of how political every single thing is. So that is itself, as a broad discipline, is fascinating for me. But revolutions in particular is what I'm interested in. And when I say revolutions, not just in terms of histories, but also the understanding of the concept, how it's applied, and in a relational manner, how the state deals with this sort of consistent boogeyman of the possibility of radical political change. So, my research interest is between understanding the state theory, but also understanding revolution and how it manifests historically, but also how we theorize it as a concept.
Mm. And kind of just like a follow up on that, how do you find teaching that? How do you find like teaching people like me who take your modules? How do you find like that experience as being a teacher of it rather than a student yourself?
I think first, I love teaching you and others. It's a pleasure as well. But I do think people assume that when we are teaching, we're no longer students. So I just wanted to flag that I sort of hide the fact that I'm learning
Yeah.
in the process of teaching. But I am still a student of revolutions while I teach it, not least because I have to prepare for these lectures. And every time we prepare, we read more and read differently. And so we pick up things that otherwise we didn't really sort of pick up. But also in the conversations we have in the seminars, particularly with bright students like yourself, it helps us open up new ideas. It helps us change our research agenda. It helps us sort of change the way we frame things.
Yeah.
So I think it's exciting. So that's just a broad idea about teaching and why it's valuable. But when teaching revolutions in particular, I think it's fascinating because it is radical. Because it pushes students to say things that they are potentially otherwise uncomfortable with because they are to sort of defeat the status quo, or you have to think outside the box to think radically. So yeah, I enjoy that bit.
No, yeah, that's really great.
I feel like you almost like have almost already said it, where it's like the difficult topics or like going like down like a radical route. Specifically, like for the Orbital, we have a news section, and when you're sort of writing about different events that are going on, sometimes you don't really know how to articulate that in a way that it's not going to offend anyone, but also be quite strategic and getting the message out of what's going on in the world. Do you have any advice for students on just how to approach these difficult topics sometimes?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I have some thought. I wouldn't say that I sort of have a clear idea because I am part of this process of finding the right way of dealing with things. But I think in general, the way to think about it is this. When we talk about something that is complex, this probably means that we have very different experiences. So people have experienced something which we think is the same thing, but in many different ways. And so the starting point should be understanding before we start making judgments, right? And I think one of the problems of today's politics and how it's being voiced and engaged with is that we are skipping the phase of understanding and moving directly into judgment. And I think before we get to the ability to judge, we have to remove ourselves, and this is critical thinking. Basically, I'm just trying to sort of think about the process and really try to understand that everyone here is a human being. There's no sort of good and evil that is set in stone. And so we need to understand that it's complex because there are complex experiences that give meaning to these different opinions. And so once we have an understanding of these different experiences, then I believe that automatically the judgment becomes way more sensible to the experiences of everyone. And of course, if one is eloquent enough, then you will find the words to acknowledge these different experiences while still being able to position yourself, of course, because I'm not a fan at all of hiding away from complex issues and just playing the liberal card and say, well, yeah, everyone is cool, right? I am with the idea of taking a stance, but the stance can at the same time be informed by and acknowledge the other opinions and experiences.
Definitely. I think something we've kind of been speaking about with our recent issue of the magazine that will be like coming out quite soon is the fact that, you know, if you don't say anything, you will kind of become complicit in a problem or complicit in that system. And I was just kind of wondering, do you think that student journalists kind of specifically with us at the Orbital, do you think that there is kind of like weight behind us publishing the way we do, and kind of like, do you think that has a wider purpose? Because often it's just a silly student magazine, which it is to an extent, but I just would like your thoughts on that.
No, I love the Orbital, and I have missed a few copies because this was because you don't find it easily, so I end up reading some of the articles online. I like the fact that you're taking responsibility for this because you're putting words out there, and regardless the size of the audience and how much people are engaging with it, the essence of journalism and of constructing knowledge in general is this sense of responsibility in the words you put out there. And so I think there is real value in thinking about how you present your ideas and what kind of debate you want to have, even if the engagement doesn't seem to be at a national level. And as students, as university, this is the moment where people are thinking about key ideas. I mean, this is where you form your views of the world. So a student magazine, I think, is central to this process of you guys becoming like independent thinkers and then influencing others' thinking process, just like we do as teachers. And I think that's the value of being in an academic setting.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I also just kind of want to follow up on that a little bit more, kind of what you were saying earlier about how, you know, we often take kind of headlines and things at face value. And again, something we always kind of talk about in our like meetings and stuff is kind of the impact of the headline and how obviously it's important, but as you were saying, there has to be that kind of constructive thought about the rest of the article or the rest of the story. Do you think that there is a certain way that we should go about writing headlines, or even when like addressing essay questions as the headline? Do you think that there's a way that should kind of be like gone about within both writing but also within conversation? Do you think there's a certain way that can be done correctly, if that makes sense?
Correctly not, but there is different ways of doing this, and I think because I'm political and I believe in the need for radical engagement with things, I think the headline is extremely political, and it is the most read bit, whether we like it or not, of the words you're putting on this paper. And so I think the headline is the catch, the headline is the statement, the headline is. It doesn't even have to speak to the essence of the article if it is a political position. So I think that's one of the tools, let's say, that you have to be political, if you want to be. Otherwise, yeah, it could be in an academic set. I mean, even academically, I mean, I try when I publish articles to have the title of my articles more than the essay, something that says more than the essay, and that's absolutely fine. Yeah.
That's great.
Just like an add-on question, I feel like so much today, especially with like young people, if we have like a certain political view and we're trying to almost like converse with other people that are completely the opposite end of like the political spectrum to us, I feel like a lot of people's reaction to it is to sort of go in guns a-blazing and just sort of argue. In your words, how would you say like the best way to approach that conversation to almost get the best information out of both parties and to sort of understand where their political standpoints come from?
Wow. Okay. This is getting harder. How much time left so that I can sort of avoid harder questions? That's a really good question. That's very thoughtful. I think back to the idea of understanding and judgment, the way I do it personally is I sometimes feel that the other person of the group, they are not starting from that common ground of understanding. They are just they seem to be willing to just start the conversation at that position of judgment. And if I see no room to go back to understanding, in other words, this is of course understanding is reciprocal. Going back to the idea of understanding what experiences I am prioritizing here in this complex issue, and then allowing this other person or group to be able to voice the priorities of the experiences that they think are a priority, and therefore that set the judgment that they have. And so once we acknowledge these different experiences as existing, right, then we can start thinking about how they speak to another, if at all. And if they don't speak to another, that's absolutely fine. So yeah, the process of allowing understanding and then moving into judgment, which then leads to disagreement or agreement in a civil way, is something that we should sort of reintroduce in our political life and with each other. And I speak about the entire spectrum. I believe that I'm, of course, on the left of the spectrum, and I still struggle with tunnel vision discussions and discussions that patronize people, which then is counterproductive because it is indeed being picked up by the far right to suggest that there's no understanding to the experiences of other people. And so this is a vicious cycle here.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Just as kind of like a easy question that we ask all of our guests, what is a book or a podcast or a media outlet that has recently inspired you or that you'd recommend to our readers and writers?
Surprisingly, I've not really picked up a podcast. I keep trying, and my partner keeps suggesting things like, "Yeah, cool." No, it's not working. So I'm just going to stick with the old school books, and I'm going to avoid academic ones. I think I recommend a really wonderful novel called Time Shelter, and it does really. It's a subtle take on how nostalgia in human life is very lucrative for political movements, and how people, especially in the world we live in today, with the crisis of political imagination, with the struggle to find that sort of progressive imagination, a lot of political movements, including the left, seems to be sort of falling back into the past and trying to sell ideas of returning to the past. And of course, the far right does it even more explicitly, "Make America Great Again" sort of thing. Yeah. So I think the novel is, of course, not explicitly political, but it's a wonderful sort of subtle take on that crisis of political imagination.
No, yeah, that's absolutely great. That is the end of our questions. So we just kind of wanted to say thank you. For coming on the podcast today. And to anyone who is watching. Our second print is on campus at the moment, and our third one, Relevant, is very much so on the way. And for issue 4, our deadlines are all on the Instagram page, which will be linked on the YouTube channel as well. So yeah, thank you so much for this today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.